The morning sun had just broken through the oak trees lining the quiet street of Sunset Estates. A gated suburban dream outside Austin, Texas, Ethan Brooks stood at his kitchen window, sipping coffee and watching his wife, Maya, lead a gentle yoga session on their back patio. It was her way of easing into the day, a peaceful routine she'd kept for years. But something about today didn't feel peaceful. Ethan felt the chill of paranoia, the kind that sneaks up after too many small things stop making sense. It had started 2 weeks earlier. A warning letter from the HOA, citing a garment drying in open view, even though Ethan was sure no laundry had been outside. Then came a violation notice claiming Maya's yoga attire violated visual community standards. The wording alone sounded invasive. Then yesterday, a handwritten note on their doorstep warned against unlicensed backyard activity. Ethan didn't like to jump to conclusions. He'd worked in cybersecurity long enough to know paranoia was often just poor data. But when Maya came inside that morning with a look of unease, eyes darting toward the hedge line, he knew it wasn't just him. She told him she felt eyes on her again. Watching. Judging. He looked out at the street. Nothing but calm. Manicured lawns. Sprinklers ticking like clockwork. But something still stank. Ethan walked down to his basement lab, his sanctuary from his old life. Servers blinked in rhythm, walls lined with routers, sensors, and a prototype he'd been building with his friend Carlos, a property-wide motion and proximity logger. It used signal triangulation to detect any tech nearby: phones, smart tags, drones. All silent, all invisible to the average person. Today, he powered it on and sensed it to a 48-hour log of the perimeter. He expected dust. Instead, the system came alive. 2 entries pinged within 10 feet of the side gate, both between 6 and 7 .m. The same MAC address each time. A phone. Someone had stood at the edge of his property just as Maya started her yoga session. He traced the device ID. The location history showed a consistent return point just 3 doors down. Barbara Shelton, known around the neighborhood as Barb, the self-righteous HOA president who walked like she owned the pavement. She was always the first to complain about weeds, Christmas lights, and flag choices. But now, she was showing up on his tracker like a ghost with a clipboard. Ethan's pulse picked up. He knew how this would look if he said something. No one would believe the HOA president of Sunset Estates was creeping on his wife before sunrise. But he had proof. And in his world, data never lied. Later that afternoon, he casually brought it up with Maya. She froze, then whispered something he hadn't heard her say in years. It's happening again. She told him about her stalker back in college. A guy who knew her schedule down to the second. Someone who left notes exactly like the ones she'd been getting now. She had trusted Sunset Estates to be a safe restart. But now, she was trembling again. Ethan knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about nosy violations anymore. This was about control, power, and something much darker. That night, he called Carlos and said 2 words, "Trackers live." Now it was Ward. And he had the code. Stick around. Because what happens in part 2 will make you question just how much power your HOA actually has. You won't believe what we find hiding in her garage. By the time the sun rose again over Sunset Estates, Ethan had already been up for hours, reviewing tracker logs frame by frame. What started as suspicion had now turned into cold, time-stamped evidence. The MAC address that showed up on their property wasn't random. It had been appearing 3 times a week, just as Maya's morning sessions began. Always for 10 minutes. Always near the same part of the fence. And every time, the device returned to the exact same house, 224 Rosecliff Lane, home of Barb Shelton, the woman who ran the HOA like a personal kingdom. Ethan didn't want to believe it at first. but the logs were precise. He had built this tracker himself, designed it to be unspoofable, accurate within inches. This wasn't a glitch. Barb had been standing just outside their yard, hiding behind hedges, and watching his wife. Ethan felt the heat rising in his chest. This wasn't just an HOA issue. This was personal. Carlos arrived that morning with donuts and a laptop. Always calm under pressure. He joked as he walked in, so Karen's turned into NSA. What's next? She bugged our coffee mugs. Ethan didn't laugh. He showed Carlos the data, and for once, his friend didn't say anything. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the location ping back and forth. Then Carlos leaned forward, tapped the map, and said, "She's not just creeping. She's calculating." Ethan and Carlos pulled up the Sunset Estates board regulations. The fines against Maya were nonsense, vague wording and outdated clauses about visible decorum, and behavior that could disturb neighborhood harmony. They were weaponizing the HOA bylaws against her, and no one seemed to be asking questions. Later that afternoon, Ethan decided to confront Barb. He walked down to her house, rang the doorbell, and waited. She opened the door with a fake smile, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Brooks," she said sweetly, "is there a problem with your recent violation notices?" "There is," Ethan replied calmly. "They're based on private activities inside my home. Which makes me wonder, how would you know about them?" Her eyes didn't flinch, but her smile thinned. "The HOA has ways of monitoring community compliance." "You mean like standing by my fence at 6 in the morning?" Her face darkened, but she recovered fast. "I think you're confused." Ethan pulled out his phone and showed her the log. Her MAC address, her timestamps, the map. Barb's tone turned instantly cold. "If you're running unauthorized surveillance, that is a serious violation of HOA policy." He stepped back. "No, you violating my wife's privacy. That's the real problem." She didn't respond, just closed the door slowly, but not before saying, "You've made a mistake, Mr. Brooks." That evening, a new citation arrived, hand-delivered. Maya had apparently been using an unapproved yoga mat color. The fine, $125. Maya didn't cry this time. She stared at the citation, then at Ethan, and simply said, "She's daring you to fight her." Ethan nodded. "Good. Let's see what she does when someone fights back with tools she doesn't understand." They recalibrated the tracker, expanding its range. Ethan embedded facial recognition into his camera system and synchronized it with the motion sensors. Now, anyone who came near their yard would be logged, filmed, and documented. It didn't take long. 2 days later, at exactly 6:17 a.m., the tracker went off. This time, it wasn't just a ping. The system activated. The new camera, hidden inside a decorative birdhouse, caught full video of Barb Shelton, crouched behind a bush, holding up her phone and pointing it toward Maya on the patio. Ethan stared at the screen, his hands trembling. Carlos leaned in. Is that Lev?" Maya stood just feet away from the hidden camera, completely unaware. The sun was barely up. Barb was filming. Zooming. Carlos whispered, "That's criminal." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, and now we have her. Finally." But what neither of them expected was where the footage would show up next. That evening, a post appeared in a private neighborhood Facebook group. A video clip. Grainy but unmistakable. It was Maya. Mid-pose. Zoomed in. Captioned with a smirking emoji. Posted anonymously. They weren't just watching. They were sharing. This wasn't just HOA harassment anymore. This was targeted humiliation. Ethan stared at the screen. His face hardened. No more warnings. It's time to make her wish she'd never looked over our fence. You think it can't get worse than your neighbor filming your wife in secret? Wait until you see what we found in her garage. Don't miss part 3, where the tracker leads us into the heart of her twisted obsession. It's not just about rules anymore. It's about control. And we're about to take it back. Ethan had always believed that technology could protect the people he loved. But as he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the Facebook post that reduced his wife's morning routine to a public spectacle, he began to feel something else creep. In something colder than anger. Maya didn't speak that night. She didn't cry either. She simply folded her yoga mat and placed it in the hallway closet like it had never existed. And then, without saying a word, she turned off all the lights and went to bed early. But Ethan stayed awake, replaying the video again and again, pausing it at every frame, searching for clues where it was filmed from, how close the lens had to be. The realization made him sick. The footage wasn't from a cell phone. It was from a drone. The next morning, Maya didn't go outside. She avoided the windows, kept the blinds shut, and flinched when the neighbor's dog barked too loud. The vibrant, playful woman who once led community yoga sessions now whispered when she spoke and locked the bathroom door twice. That's when Ethan knew this had gone far beyond HOA policy violations. This was targeted, calculated harassment. It wasn't just about enforcing rules. It was about punishing Maya for existing outside someone else's control. Carlos came over with a grim expression and something under his arm. An RF scanner. Either someone's flying drones from their backyard, or they've got a private network running surveillance. Either way, it's not legal. They swept the perimeter together. The RF scanner beeped once, twice, then rapidly. As they approached the back fence near the garden shed, Carlos's eyes widened. You're not gonna like this. Wedged under the eave of their neighbor's shed, Barb Shelton's shed, was a camouflaged signal repeater. Still warm. It was transmitting to a nearby device. Carlos connected to the open signal and pulled a still frame. It was Ethan's yard. There. Patio. Maya's yoga mat. That's it, Ethan muttered. I'm done playing defense. But even as they documented the repeater, snapped photos, and logged timestamps, a deeper chill settled over him. This was too elaborate for just petty revenge. Too technical. Too methodical. Barb was nosy, yes, but this was something else. Something obsessive. Later that afternoon, Ethan noticed the same anonymous Facebook account had posted another video. This one was older, weeks old. Maya watering plants. Maya reading on the porch. Maya talking on the phone. They'd been watching her for months. That night, Ethan sat beside his wife and told her everything about the tracker, the repeater, the videos. She didn't say anything at first. Just nodded, closed her eyes, and whispered, "It's happening again." That was the moment everything cracked open. Maya had never told him the full story of what happened back in college. How her ex-boyfriend, an engineering student, had stalked her using homemade devices. How he'd hacked into her apartment's Wi-Fi and streamed footage from a modified smoke detector. How no one believed her until it was too late. Ethan had always thought she'd moved past it. But now, here they were again, only this time. It wasn't a jealous boyfriend. It was an HOA president with power, access, and a twisted justification. The next morning, Ethan filed a formal police report. But when Detective Fiona Raines arrived, Barb was already ready. She met them in her front yard, smiling like nothing was wrong. "Ah, Officer Raines. I was just about to call you. Mr. Brooks has been surveilling board members without consent. I believe that violates community trust." Ethan handed over the footage, the logs, the drone signal paths, and the screen captures. Barb folded her arms, but never stopped smiling. Rains, to her credit, didn't look amused. "We'll be investigating all parties, Miss Shelton. For now, I recommend you cease any personal monitoring activities." "Understood." Barb nodded sweetly. "Of course, officer." But as they turned to leave, Barb said just loud enough for Ethan to hear, "People who poke around too much tend to regret it." That night, Ethan decided it was time to see exactly what she was hiding, not just in her shed, but in her garage, because Barb wasn't working alone. And when Ethan and Carlos cracked the network behind that drone, what they found changed everything. They thought it was one woman. It wasn't. Get ready for part 4. You're not going to believe what we discovered behind those doors. And the worst part, she wasn't the only one with access to the feed. Ethan had learned long ago that surveillance was a two-way street. People who watch rarely expect to be watched back. That night, he and Carlos sat in Ethan's office, lit only by the glow of 6 monitors. The drone's repeater had led them to a local mesh network, with an unsecured port hidden in plain sight. What they found inside wasn't just footage from Ethan's property. It was an entire archive. The feed contained clips from 6 homes in Sunset Estates, time-stamped, categorized. All women. Maya was just one of them. It was clear Barb had been running a full-blown surveillance operation. What wasn't clear was whether she was acting alone. Carlos pulled metadata from the drone server, tracing it to a device license. The owner ID shocked them both. The drone hadn't been purchased by Barb. It had been purchased by the HOA itself. Someone on the board had authorized this tech, budgeted it, and deployed it under the radar. That meant this wasn't just Barb's obsession. This was systemic. The next morning, Ethan released a redacted version of the footage to a private neighborhood forum. Just enough to raise questions, not get sued. He wanted to see who flinched. Within 2 hours, board member Jay Conrad resigned. By nightfall, 2 others had gone silent. Ethan had poked the hornet's nest, and now the nest was panicking. Barb responded the only way she knew how. She issued a formal complaint to the HOA citing unauthorized network interference, and attempted to suspend Ethan's home surveillance equipment, citing obscure bylaws about privacy preservation of board officials. Ethan laughed bitterly when he read the notice. She was trying to use the HOA rules to protect herself from being exposed by the very tech she used to spy on others. But he didn't just have proof. He had public outrage. Other homeowners began to ask questions. One neighbor, a widow named Carol who lived alone, posted screenshots of a drone hovering over her pool weeks earlier. Another man revealed he'd found strange screws in his garden floodlight ones he hadn't installed. Sunset Estates was turning on its queen bee, and Ethan planned to make it official. That weekend, he organized a private town hall at the local rec center. He invited every homeowner, even Barb. Only one person declined. Barb didn't show, but her car was parked outside. The crowd inside the rec center buzzed with unease. Ethan stood at the front of the room, laptop open, projector humming behind him. One by one, he presented the evidence: the network logs, the repeater, the archived footage, the receipts from HOA discretionary tech funds used to purchase the drone. Every slide made the room colder. Gasps turned to murmurs. By the time he got to the anonymous video of Maya that had surfaced online, people weren't just disturbed, they were angry. And that's when the police showed up. Two patrol cars pulled up to the curb. Officers entered the room calmly, speaking to Ethan first. Barb had called them. She claimed Ethan was inciting harassment and had hacked into HOA property. But Detective Fiona Raines was among them, and she wasn't buying it. She stood in the back of the room, arms crossed, as Ethan handed over a USB drive containing his findings. The officers reviewed it. Then, instead of approaching Ethan, they walked out and straight toward Barb's car. Carlos peeked through the blinds and whispered, "Oh, they're not here for us." The next 20 minutes felt like slow motion. The police spoke to Barb through the window. She looked angry, animated. But when one of the officers pointed toward the rec center and held up a printed image of the repeater, her face changed. She got out of the car, quietly, head down. Then they opened the trunk. Inside were 2 more drone boxes, unopened, identical to the one used over Ethan's property. Rains stepped inside the rec center again. Now with purpose, she faced the homeowners. There is an active investigation now into the misuse of surveillance technology by members of the HOA board. If any of you believe you've been filmed or recorded without consent, I suggest filing a report. People stood up. Several women clapped. The meeting ended in chaos, but not the kind Barb was hoping for. Outside, Barb stood against her car, surrounded by flashing red and blue lights. She wasn't arrested, not yet. But the optics said everything. Carlos leaned into Ethan's ear and said, "You broke the Queen's crown, man." But Ethan wasn't smiling. He knew it wasn't over. The next morning, an HOA emergency email hit everyone's inbox. Not from Barb. From Jay Conrad, the board member who had resigned. The subject line read, "Redacted footage, urgent HOA security update." Ethan clicked it. Inside was a 3-minute video clip. Private. Crisp. Clear. It showed Ethan's front door. Maya answering it. A package arriving. Someone had hacked his own system and turned it against him. Carlos stared at the screen, jaw tightening. "This isn't Barb." Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, she was just the front. Coming up in part 6, the one person Ethan trusted turns out to be part of the problem. And what they were really after will leave you stunned. Because this wasn't just about watching. It was about what Maya had. And someone wanted it back. Ethan stared at the footage on his screen, blinking in disbelief. It wasn't just a video clip. It was a full system dump, camera angles, timestamps, and logs pulled directly from his own security network. But that wasn't what chilled him. What chilled him was the clarity. Whoever took this didn't just hack his system. They understood it down to the custom encryption layers he had designed. This wasn't some amateur phishing attack. It was someone who had worked with him. Someone who knew the blueprint. Carlos. The name rang in his head like a dull drumbeat. He didn't want to believe it. But the more he dug, the less he could deny. Ethan traced the IP used in the breach. It pinged from a local node only 5 blocks away. He checked the device signatures. One of them matched Carlos's tablet from last week. Still, he had to be sure. Later that evening, Ethan invited Carlos over like nothing had happened. He played it cool, even offered pizza and beers just like old times. They sat in the garage, surrounded by wires, tools, and glowing LED screens. Carlos rambled on about HOA members losing their minds. What Ethan nodded and smiled. But behind the monitor, a small AI script ran facial sentiment scans and voice stress analysis in real time. When Ethan casually mentioned the breach, Carlos barely blinked. But the system flagged the tone in his voice. 3 spikes in under 5 seconds. That was enough. Ethan stood slowly, walked to the far side of the garage. "Funny thing about my system," he said, "it records everything even when it's being hacked." Carlos's face didn't change right away, but his hand froze on his beer. "You're accusing me," he said. "I'm asking you why you cloned my security key 6 weeks ago." Carlos sighed. "You don't understand what you're dealing with." Ethan stepped closer. "Then explain it." Carlos set down the bottle. You remember Maya's stalker in college? He wasn't just some creep. He was connected. His father sat on 3 HOA boards across the state. When he got expelled, his dad covered it up, moved the kid to another town, changed his name. Ethan felt his stomach drop. Are you saying he's here? Carlos nodded. Not just here. On the board. Jay Conrad. He used Maya's past to blackmail Barb into helping him build this surveillance network. She thought she was just enforcing roles. But Jay, he's watching for someone else. Ethan felt like the ground had vanished beneath him. He hadn't just been fighting Karen power trips. He'd been fighting a predator. Carlos pulled a small flash drive from his coat and placed it on the workbench. I didn't hack you, Ethan. I traced who did. I spoofed their logins to bait them. That's how I got this. Ethan grabbed the drive and plugged it in. Video files filled the screen, some going back months. One folder was labeled with Maya's initials. Another was labeled Restoration Candidate 6. The footage wasn't just of Maya. It included screenshots from her old college social media accounts, blog posts, even a copy of her undergraduate transcript. It was a full psychological profile. A target file. Ethan's voice cracked. Why would Jay Conrad want this? Carlos looked sick as he said it. Because he's not just watching. He's rebuilding something. That night, Ethan contacted Detective Rains and handed her the drive. She promised to open an internal investigation, but warned that Jay had influence. If this goes up the chain, she said, you'll need more than video clips. You'll need undeniable proof. The next morning, the HOA board held a virtual emergency meeting. Everyone in Sunset Estates was invited to join via Zoom. Maya didn't want to be there, but Ethan convinced her. They sat in silence as the screen filled with board members' faces. Barb was missing. Jay Conrad looked calm. To calm. Then it happened. Jay began sharing his screen to show new community guidelines, supposedly to restore neighborhood integrity. But instead of a document, his screen flashed to a background app, a live feed of Maya. In their kitchen. Someone gasped. Someone else started shouting. Jay fumbled to close the window. I'm not sure how that got there. Too late. Ethan clicked. Recorded was the evidence they needed. The smoking gun, broadcasted to the entire HOA and half the neighborhood. Maya stood frozen behind Ethan, a single tear slipping down her cheek. Not from fear. From relief. They had him. But Ethan knew this wasn't over, because someone else had built that app, and they were still out there. In part 7, Ethan takes the fight into the courtroom. But a deeper conspiracy starts to emerge, and it all leads to a shocking betrayal that will change everything you thought you knew about Sunset Estates. Get ready. This war isn't over. It's only just begun. The courtroom buzzed with tension before the hearing even began. Word had spread fast about the Zoom call, the exposed feed, and the footage that stunned every homeowner in Sunset Estates. For once, the HOA wasn't hiding behind bylaws and vague statements. They were standing trial. Ethan sat quietly beside Maya at the plaintiff's table, hands folded, jaw tight. Detective Rains, now officially part of the internal investigation, had submitted a mountain of evidence: device logs, signal traces, the drone receipts, the data Carlos pulled from the repeater network, and most importantly, the video of Jay Conrad accidentally screen sharing a live stream of Maya inside their home. Across from them sat Jay, polished in a tailored suit, cool and composed, like the whole thing was a misunderstanding. Beside him was Barb Shelton, smaller than usual, makeup overdone, clutching a stack of papers she hoped would save her. And presiding over the case was Judge Mathers, a retired Marine turned judge known for one thing above all else: zero tolerance for games. When the hearing opened, the HOAS lawyer made a weak case. Their technology initiative was designed to enhance safety and monitor exterior violations discreetly, not invade privacy. Jay nodded solemnly, throwing occasional side glances toward Maya as if he were the victim. But the moment Ethan was called to testify, the mood changed. He laid it out clean. The citations, the tracker pings, the repeater, the drone logs, the hacked footage, the facial recognition triggers. The data Carlos had provided was Thor dates, locations, user credentials, and device serial numbers all traced back to HOA-controlled infrastructure. Then, the final blow, Ethan played the clip from the Zoom meeting. Jay's screen share. Maya. Live feed. No filters. No excuses. Judge Mathers leaned back, arms crossed. Let me get this straight. This HOA without homeowner consent used drones, cameras, and signal repeaters to monitor residents, including this man's wife, and then shared that data over a private server. Jay opened his mouth to speak, but the judge cut him off. I've seen dictatorships with fewer control issues. Laughter broke out in the courtroom. Barb, flustered, asked to read a personal statement. She stood shakily, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. This was never personal. I only wanted order, structure. Maya's routine was becoming a distraction. Some of the men in the neighborhood expressed concern. I simply passed along their complaints. Ethan narrowed his eyes. That one sentence turned the room. Judge Mathers raised an eyebrow. So, you're saying you punished this woman because men couldn't mind their own business? Barb went pale. I didn't mean it like, that's enough. Then came Jay's turn to testify. Calm, composed, full of legal fluff. He denied all knowledge of the drone program, claimed the feed on the Zoom call was a tech error, said it could have been a prank, a virus, a spoof. It was all falling apart until the final 20 minutes. Carlos was called to the stand. Ethan looked at him with pride. But something was off. Carlos didn't open with the data logs. He didn't describe the repeater findings. Instead, he said, I regret being pulled into this. There's no hard evidence proving Jay Conrad accessed the footage intentionally. And the device signature we traced, it was cloned. It could have been anyone's system, including Ethan's. Ethan froze. Maya whispered, what is he doing? Carlos didn't meet his eyes. He handed over a revised report, one that left Alki data, one that introduced plausible uncertainty. Judge Mathers looked frustrated. You're saying the hacker covered their tracks that perfectly? Carlos nodded. It's possible. Jay smiled faintly. Ethan realized what had happened. Carlos had flipped. Not completely, but just enough to muddy the water, to cast doubt, to shield Jay from a full conviction. After the hearing, Ethan stormed out, fists clenched, eyes burning. Carlos followed, pretending to be calm. I had no choice, he said. They have more than you know. Ethan spun around. You betrayed her. No, Carlos said, lowering his voice. I protected you. You just don't see it yet. Back home. Ethan paced the garage, heart racing, fury mixing with confusion. His entire case, his fight for Maya's safety, was hanging by a thread. Then his tracker pinged. New activity. Outside his home. Only this time, it wasn't a drone. It was a car. Same one from Maya's college. Stocking case, new plates, same model, same bumper scrape. They weren't just watching again. They were back. In part 8. Ethan takes justice into his own hands, and the final confrontation will leave you breathless. Because this time, the stalker isn't hiding behind HOA rules. He's coming through the front door. The silver sedan idled across the street for 13 minutes. No one got out. No door opened. No engine revved. It just sat there silent and watching. Ethan knew that car. He'd never seen it up close. But he'd seen photos of it back when Maya showed him screenshots from her old college security reports. The scrape across the back bumper, the dent in the driver's side mirror, the model, the color. It was the same, down to the license plate format, only now it bore Texas tags. Ethan stepped back from the window and picked up his phone. Detective. Rains answered on the second ring. I think the stalker's here, he said. She paused. We're outside my house. Right now. I'm 5 minutes out. Ethan didn't wait. He pulled up his security feed, rewound it, and zoomed in. Sure enough, the figure behind the wheel matched the silhouette from a different clip, the one from last year's HOA barbecue. The same man who'd kept his head down and sunglasses on even after sundown. A face that had always seemed to blend into the background. J. Conrad. No suit now. No polished smile. Just cold eyes, watching through the windshield. Ethan turned to Maya, who was holding their dog in the hallway, frozen. He stepped toward her and spoke softly. Go upstairs. Lock the bedroom. I'm handling this. She didn't argue. He walked. Outside, phone in hand, heart pounding so hard he could barely hear his steps over the thump in his ears. Jay rolled down the window slowly, almost like he'd been waiting for the cue. You think you're clever, Jay said calmly. I don't have to be, Ethan replied. You're not hiding anymore. Jay smirked. You think this ends with a courtroom, with HOA votes? You ruined my family's reputation. My father built those neighborhoods. My rules kept people safe. Ethan stepped closer. Your rules watched women undress in their own homes. You turned privacy into a commodity. Jay leaned forward, voice low. Maya was mine before you even knew her. I knew what she liked, what she feared. I shaped her. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the silence like a blade. Jay's eyes narrowed. You recorded that, didn't you? He said. Ethan didn't answer, but the red light on his phone was still blinking. Jay floored the gas, tires screeching as the car lurched forward. But before he could clear the street, a cruiser slammed into him from the side, pinning the sedan against the curb. Rains jumped out with her weapon drawn. Other officers followed. It was over in seconds. Jay was dragged from the car screaming about power, about legacy, about how no one understood what he was trying to build. But no one listened. They were too busy watching Maya, standing at the door, hands covering her mouth as relief washed over her like a tidal wave. For the first time in weeks, she didn't flinch when someone shouted. She didn't cry when Jay glared at her from the back of the police car. She just watched him vanish in the flashing lights. Over the next few weeks, Sunset Estates transformed. Barb resigned permanently. Carlos disappeared, moved out without warning, leaving only a handwritten note and a disconnected number. Jay's father tried to shut everything down, but the court's ruling made sure the files would never be sealed. Maya started yoga again. Not in the backyard, but in the community park with neighbors joining her. One by one, Ethan used the civil settlement money to launch a new company, Private Site Security, offering smart defense systems for homeowners. His first client, Carol, the widow down the street, and the HOA. They rewrote their bylaws from scratch. No more secret budgets. No more drones. No more shadows. But the final twist came 3 months later. A manila envelope arrived at Ethan's front door. No return address. No name. Inside was a flash drive. Just one file. A short video. It showed a person walking through a server room, long hair, black hoodie. They stopped at a terminal, typed, smiled at the camera. The footage ended with 4 words on screen. You missed one, Ethan. The war was over. But the game wasn't. Be sure to subscribe and follow, because the next chapter is already watching.